the beechnut's always fine.
Welcome back to The Place of Places, a chapter-by-chapter analysis of William Saroyan's 1972 memoir, Places Where I've Done Time. Today we head over to the Great Northern Hotel, 118 West 57th Street, New York, 1935. This was a special place to Saroyan. He tells us, "I loved being at the Great Northern Hotel, and I went back to the hotel again and again when I was in New York, until at last it just wouldn't do anymore. The hotel had changed. It was too grand for his low budget in 1928, when he had to stay at the YMCA. He had admired the narrow entrance of the Great Northern, and dreamed that he would stay there when he made it big. In 1935, he was suddenly a famous writer and could afford the spacious rooms of the Great Northern. Still a young man in his 20s, he was ready to indulge in the $12 per week rates, and so began a 20-year affair with the Great Northern. Though he briefly owned a penthouse on 3rd Avenue, as we learned in Chapter 20, he mostly stayed in hotels whenever he went to New York, even over long time periods. It's said that in the 1920s, female guests in many hotels in New York City were kept under close supervision and not allowed to arrive after dark, presumably so the hotels could avoid the appearance of hosting brothels. But the Great Northern was one of only a few that treated men and women equally in this regard. It's unclear if it was used as a brothel, but that wouldn't have dissuaded Saroyan, who believed, like Charles Dickens, in the dignity of the downtrodden, and they often made great characters too. Built in 1910, the Great Northern always served short-term and long-term renters. Over time, it lost some of its luster, and by the late 60s, it had shifted into a welfare hotel that served low-income families as transitional housing. By the early 70s, it was brought down, and later, the upscale Le Parker Meridien Hotel was built on the site. Saroyan famously wrote The Time of Your Life in 6 days in 1939 at the Great Northern, and that was arguably his greatest hits. In obituaries, he wrote that in 1939 he met Dudley Murphy, a writer, actor, and film director who later opened a hotel down the road from Saroyan in Malibu, and had a cup of coffee with him at the Automat on 57th Street near 6th Avenue, and just down a bit from the narrow entrance and long hall to the front desk at the Great Northern Hotel, which was brought down and is gone forever. Shall we cry out, alas? Yes, let's do that. In many of these references to the Great Northern across his memoirs, he makes particular note of the narrow entrance juxtaposed against the large rooms. To Saroyan, the hotel may have felt something akin to Alice's entrance into Wonderland. As a young man, it was his entree into the world of fame and fortune, and the best version of New York that his father never got to know while he was there. Many of his memoirs make note of how his father Armagnac could have stayed in New Jersey and thrived as a minister there, but was instead urged to move to Fresno to be closer to family. And so William, in those early years, looked at any amount of success in New York as a road to redemption for his father, and a point of pride that the son could accomplish that immigrant dream of the New York high life in only one generation. Others may have looked at the Great Northern and never seen much more than a middling hotel that faded into obscurity, but Saroyan saw it as a portal into the life his father might have had. He tells us that the New York Times section, News of the Rialto, erroneously claimed that he was writing a new play in 1935. I read in the New York Times that I had recently arrived in New York and that I was writing a play which I expected to finish before sailing to Europe. How or where the Times had gotten this misinformation I can't imagine, but I decided, well, if the New York Times is saying I'm writing a play, why not? Why make a liar out of the New York Times? Write a play. And here is that article from April 19th, 1935. It reads, "It is a feckless fiction writer indeed who does not at one time or another invade the dramatic field. Now comes William Saroyan, the author of that volume of short stories entitled The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, who admitted yesterday that he was at work on a play, not the first he has ever written, but the first he has ever considered showing around. It involves, said he, a new technique, at least something which he has never seen used, a sort of utilization of his short story technique in dramatic form. Should he not go abroad or do something else in the meantime, he hopes to have it finished in about a month. Then it will be up to the producers. Indeed, Saroyan did later talk about new and different techniques in playwriting that brought dreamy surrealism to the stage through a dance movement, monologue, and live music during his plays. Supposedly, he had told the publisher, Bennett Cerf, that after seeing the hit play Ceiling Zero, he could write a better play in 24 hours. This was probably the source of the Times article. In 1928, he had tried to write his first novel that he called The Subway, meaning, of course, the New York subway, but also meaning the concealed way, the inside way, the hidden truth, the hidden meaning of people, of passengers, not of the subway alone, but of time, riding to the end of the line. He didn't write the book, but he tells us he regretted not writing it. It seems 20-year-old Saroyan was deeply digging into the metaphysical and the lines between illusion and reality, and would never stop. He said that as a 20-year-old in New York, going to work each day, the people on the subway, to me, were everything else in the world as well as people. One was a potato, one was an onion, one was a lizard, one was a snake, one was a canary, one was a hog, one was an elephant, and I wanted to write a book, an important novel called The Subway. Thinking back on this time in 1928, and the novel he never wrote, he began writing a play that would become Subway Circus, which uses 10 vignette scenes to explore the dreams of anonymous people in a subway car. It later appeared in the collection of experimental pieces Razzle Dazzle. It borrowed heavily from the vaudeville style, which had always excited him, and which was still fresh in his mind in 1935, as he thought about his 1928 novel in progress. It was adapted for the screen by Herbert Gare and staged by the Group Theatre in 1939, the same troupe that put on My Heart's in the Highlands and The Time of Your Life. They were a rebellious experimental troupe that matched well with Saroyan's style. Saroyan was interested in the subconscious and dream states, so it's little wonder that the Great Northern, with its narrow entrance like an eye, ear, or mouth, expanded into large rooms like imagination itself, the playground of the brain. In Sons Come and Go, Mothers Hang In Forever, he has a chapter called A Little of the Immortality and a Few of the Immortals of 57th Street. This is an ode to the Great Northern and its neighbors, the Russian Tea Room, the Automat, Carnegie Hall. He says here that he liked the name of the Great Northern, and it had large and spacious rooms that allowed him to write at a weekly rate of $18 for a room in 1939. He would enjoy the characters of New York and then run back up to room 428 in the hotel after rejuvenating conversations with the oddballs of cities. All along 57th Street, one is forever coming upon somebody who has done something somewhere in a very special way. In the New York Times article, The Time of Their Lives, from November 12, 1939, the author claims Saroyan was staying in room 510 at the Great Northern when he wrote the famous play, and that lately Saroyan had upgraded to room 1019. And all of this may have been true, or maybe none of it was, as this chapter is quick to point out the unreal, the half-truths, the suggestible chain of events that affect the progress of a life. The hotel was also where, in the mid-50s, during his stint there again, he was struck by the theme for a waltz in an opera, which he shared with musician and writer Paul Bowles, who rejected it. Even still, the Great Northern was a place of creation for Saroyan, but he admits that eventually he had outgrown and grown more worldly, more wealthy, that the world had changed, so he moved on and up, leaving the Great Northern behind after he had sheltered in its bosom during good times and bad. Like his father, he found New York to be a place of great opportunity and also great disappointment. And eventually this portal to Wonderland itself decayed and disappeared, mirroring the experience he had with wealth and fame. It seems that Saroyan felt a sort of kinship with the building, as if it was his familiar or a good luck charm. It had an energy that fit well with his creativity, and though it doesn't stand today in the same iteration, it's another place where Saroyan dropped a little piece of his soul for posterity. Let's put this on the Saroyan map and move on.